Radio Festival with headliner Luis Enrique, El Príncipe de la Salsa, on Saturday, November 1st. Details at visitgainesville.com/festivals. The North Florida TPO is dedicated to transportation planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, resilient, and connected region. More information available at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com.
This is WJCT News 89.9 Jacksonville. Up next, national and local news from NPR and the WJCT News team.
Good morning, I'm Ann Schindler. On today's First Coast Connect, it's the biggest stories of the week. A crackdown on campus speech, a city council member's efforts to influence airport expenditures, back-to-back state losses in high-profile murder cases, dueling, departing university presidents, and a funding plan hopes to bridge divisions among Eastside advocates. We'll talk about all that and more with our panel of journalists on our Friday Week in Review. Later, remembering the first Filipinos in America. We preview this weekend's Barrio Fiesta. You can join the conversation on air by calling 904-549-2937. You can also email First Coast Connect at WJCT.org or reach out on social media. It's all ahead this hour after today's news.
I'm from NPR News in Washington. I'm Corva Coleman. Consumer prices remained higher in September. They were up 3% over what they were a year ago. The inflation report released just this morning from the federal government had been delayed because of the federal government shutdown. That is now 24 days old. President Trump says he can continue U.S. military strikes against boats in international waters. He continues to insist the U.S. is targeting drug smuggling, but he has not provided evidence. There are at least 9 known U.S. attacks in the Caribbean Sea and Eastern Pacific Ocean. About 40 people have been killed. Trump says he's going to go farther with the U.S. military and doesn't feel he necessarily needs Congress to declare a war.
You know, the land is going to be next. And we may go to the Senate, we may go to the, Congress and tell them about it. But I can't imagine they'd have any problem with it.
Trump has already said he's authorized CIA operations on Venezuelan territory. Virginia is the latest state where lawmakers are pushing to redraw the state's congressional map. It follows Texas, California, Missouri, and other state legislatures. From member station VPM, Jod Khalil reports Virginia Democrats are seeking to push back against President Trump's effort to expand Republican control in the U.S. Congress.
The clerks in the Virginia House and Senate told members they would be back in Richmond on Monday, but didn't specify the reason. Republicans in the Virginia legislature confirmed that Democrats are planning to begin the process of redistricting. Delegate Terry Kilgore is the House Minority Leader.
We have been told that's what we're coming back for, and it's reliable sources, so we know that we are coming back for redistricting.
Virginia amended its constitution in 2020 to have a bipartisan commission draw its electoral maps. Constitutional amendments usually involve a multi-year process, but it appears Democrats are attempting to make the change more quickly. The session is in the final week before this year's election and would also take the Republicans' nominee for governor off the campaign trail. Lieutenant Governor Winsome Earl Sears presides over the state Senate. For NPR News, I'm Jad Khalil in Richmond.
European Union leaders have agreed to a new sanctions package against Russia, but they're divided about whether and how to use frozen Russian assets to help Ukraine. Terry Schultz reports from Brussels.
For EU leaders who've now passed 19 rounds of sanctions on Moscow, the first measures in President Trump's term are very welcome pressure to make the Kremlin end its war on Ukraine. But the 27 governments were unable to bridge differences over whether 140 billion euros in frozen Russian assets held in a Belgian financial institution can be used to guarantee a loan to Ukraine. Belgian Prime Minister Bart de Wever insists they all share the risk that Russia could legally demand the funds back.
We will suffer from enormous claims, so if you want to do this, we will have to do this all together.
EU officials will now draft a plan for how the loan would work, and leaders will come back to it in December. For NPR News, I'm Terry Schultz in Brussels.
It's NPR.
Good morning. You're listening to WJCT News 89.9 in Jacksonville. I'm Stephen Ponson. It's 9:04. Affordable housing advocates say home values in St. Johns County have priced many people out of the market, which is why Habitat for Humanity says it's stepping up its home building efforts. The St. Johns County arm of the nonprofit organization recently completed its largest land purchase to date in the West Augustine neighborhood. Habitat St. John's President Melinda Everson says it's a big undertaking, but one she and her team are looking forward to completing.
I'm excited because this is a big step for us. We've never done something on this level. Bought a 32-acre parcel and looked at building 72-unit neighborhoods. So it's a big step for us.
Plans for the neighborhood are still in the early stages, but if all of the permits come through from the county and plans stay on schedule, construction should begin in 2027. In the tropics, Melissa is setting up to be a historic storm for the Caribbean. Melissa remains a tropical storm, and heavy rain is not expected to stop for Jamaica, eastern Cuba, parts of Haiti, and the Dominican Republic through the weekend, leading to flash flooding and mudslides. Meteorologists at the Florida Public Radio Emergency Network say the storm is forecast to continue moving slowly in the Caribbean Sea and is expected to intensify into a major hurricane by the end of the weekend. The storm is currently forecast to turn to the north late Monday or Tuesday and is expected to stay to the east of Florida once it makes its turn. Temperatures will top out in the upper 70s to lower 80s today here in northeast Florida with breezy conditions, and we do have a high chance for some rip currents out at our local beaches through the weekend.
Support for NPR comes from NPR stations. Other contributors include the Wallace Foundation, an independent, nonpartisan research foundation collaborating with grantees and partners in the arts, school leadership, and youth development. More at wallacefoundation.org. This is NPR.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided in part by Baptist Health and North Florida TPO.
Opinions expressed on the First Coast Connect Week in Review are those of our panelists and do not reflect the views of WJCT News 89.9.
Good morning. I'm Ann Schendler, and it's Friday, which means it's time for our First Coast Week in Review here on First Coast Connect. Among our topics, local college professors react to a statewide crackdown on campus speech. The airport rebuffs a city council member's effort to plunder its surplus. Eastside residents reach a deal over how millions of reinvestment dollars will flow to the community. The state attorney loses back-to-back cases in two high-profile murder trials. And UNF and JU face leadership shakeups as their presidents announce their next moves. To talk about all that and more, I am joined by Nate Monroe, executive editor at the Tributary. Good morning, Nate.
Good morning, Ann.
Tricia Booker, author and journalism professor at the University of North Florida. Good morning, Tricia.
Hi, Ann.
Will Brown, race and poverty reporter at Jacksonville Today.
Good morning, Ann.
And the inimitable Frank Powers, former assignment editor at WJXT News4Jax. Good morning, Frank.
Good morning. A week ago, I was in the White Mountains of New Hampshire. Now I'm here. What happened?
I don't know. We'll try to satisfy. We'll do the best we can. We can't really compare to the White Mountains. But Nate, I'm going to start with you because your outlet and ours have been covering what's been happening on college campuses lately. It's not really a secret, but, we found out more about the environment on campus, some more details about specific local impacts to teachers.
Yeah, our one of our investigative reporters, Michael Vasquez, published a piece last week about UNF carrying out orders that came down from some of the state's top education officials to nix certain dirty words out of course descriptions and his syllabus. And these are words, you can probably guess some of what they are: culture, diversity, inclusion. And this order applied to course descriptions kind of regardless of the context in which those words were used. And so I think there was this, I think the two elements of the story are, both the kind of censorship from on high, but also just the kind of wide dragnet that's been cast to capture some of these words. I mean, culture is a word that has scientific application. I wonder if some, some professor in the science or, biology finds a need to discuss like gut culture or something. Like, I don't know if that offends some sort of, invisible line. And it's not clear, in anything that we saw from, email traffic between UNF administrators discussing this, it's not clear to me that they really are making any distinction for the context.
And one of the things pointed out in that story is there's certain words like inclusion that are really a necessary piece of like special ed curriculum, because
Right.
you're talking about trying to create environments that include, kids of all abilities. And so it actually is part of a practical, or I think in the case of the teacher that you spoke to, who's in the language arts area, talking about, his syllabus had a reference to a diversity of texts and a
Right.
diversity of sources, and that was nixed.
Right. And just again, to put a point on this, like this was a mandate to nix these words out of, some of these course description documents. There was no indication that anyone raised any objection to the content of his courses or found anything that he was actually teaching to be inappropriate. It was just this very surface level, I suppose some people might say performative, mandate to just nix these words that have been thrown into a very kind of political context.
So one of the folks that you spoke to for your story is somebody we also had on the program. We spoke to him a little over a week ago, but the program aired as a pre-tape on Monday. Let's hear a little bit of what John White had to say. He was talking specifically about the origin of this, which is Senate Bill 266, and he talks about what it enables and what it requires.
Senate Bill 266, which the ACLU is bravely fighting, specifically says that our syllabi and other materials, that we can't talk about systemic racism, sexism, oppression, and privilege, or that they are inherent in institutions of the United States or created to maintain social, political, economic injustices. I'd like to point out that this, by definition, would prohibit history professors from talking about the 13th, 14th, 15th, or 19th Amendments to the United States Constitution. It would forbid us from talking about the Dred Scott decision, the Plessy versus Ferguson decision, the Kawamatsu decision, Jim Crow laws, anti-miscegenation laws. It's such a broadly written statute that it is silencing us from talking about a myriad of things that are central to American governance.
Will Brown, you are shaking your head and moving the mic away. Thoughts?
Well, we're going to discuss the Eastside later in this show, and when you can't discuss systemic racism, well, that's the reason why the Eastside is receiving as much money as it is now to overcome the systemic racism that was over there for decades. So much of Jacksonville, from education to job opportunities, has been because of systemic racism. So when people choose to not acknowledge it, well, then you don't have a complete understanding of why things are the way they are. For example, I mean, even some of the neighborhoods in Jacksonville are because of systemic racism. The East Side is where it is because the people who lived out east were really close to the docks. Brooklyn and La Villa were black suburbs, in no small part because of systemic racism. Even if you look at somewhere like Riverside and Avondale, like the geography of Jacksonville is in some small part because of systemic racism and redlining.
Things like redlining, right?
Yes. So when you can't teach that in Florida, or when students are not allowed to learn that in public spaces, well, then it impacts the people who do not have the finances to have community and loved ones teach them to fill in the gaps that a public education should have been teaching you, but is not.
Tricia, we, in addition to talking to the ACLU and the professor from UNF, we also talked to the union rep at FSCJ. Similar things experienced there. You're on this campus. What are you hearing in the way of concerns from teachers who feel like they are not able to speak freely or fairly represent their classes in their syllabus descriptions?
The FSCJ professor you had on mentioned the chilling effect, and I think that's the secondary, primary concern of people, that we are seeing this every day. So, and nothing that John White said surprised me. We are changing language in our syllabi every day. As an example, we had to change the term embrace diversity to understand diversity. in some of our goals that we set out to accomplish in our courses. The reason we were allowed to keep the word diversity is because accreditation requires us to talk about diversity, but we can't embrace it. We just have to understand it. Another example is a colleague who teaches a segment on representation and stereotypes. On her syllabi, though, she has to call it media analysis rather than diversity and representation. So we're having to do this stuff all the time. I think people are very careful in what they say in class. This is the first line of defense, I think, is that having to try to protect our syllabi. We've kind of given up on that. We're just having to comply with what the university and the state are requiring. In the classroom, we're having to be careful, but as long as we're not being kind of taped or recorded, I think we're able to teach still what we believe in. But it's scary, and we're all dealing with that.
And I mean, you probably won't know if you're being taped or recorded because, students now are allowed to record that interchange without disclosing it. But Frank, I want to ask you because the ACLU representative that we had, she's the executive director in Florida, to the question of whether professors, as Tricia says, are changing their syllabus, for instance. ACLU appealed the Senate Bill 266, saying that it was causing harm. And the reason that the judge in that case, the federal judge, dismissed most of the claims that the ACLU was bringing was saying there's not an actual harm. These people are self-censoring. That's not a harm that's being done onto them. That's a self-imposed injury, and therefore they don't have a claim. And so what John White was saying in terms of filing his grievance was, somebody has to show the actual harm that is happening. And if teachers are self-censoring, there isn't going to be a legal basis.
Well, they're self-centering at the point of a gun. Governor DeSantis has made perceived woke or leftist messaging the boogeyman in Florida for years, despite the fact that the Stop Woke Act largely was struck down by the courts. Since then, he's directed his appointees on the Board of Governors to carry the fight to Florida state universities. You know what it speaks of? Here's another word that should be out there: fear. You can't espouse your worldviews on young minds. Only we can espouse our worldviews on young minds, with apologies to the writers of Animal House. The far right and the far left, as far apart, 180 degrees in philosophy is how the world should function. They do share one thing in common, and that is they're terrified of objective, independent thought. And it's that extremist dogma on both ends of this country that's driving the ongoing polarization, and we see it in just about every facet of American society right now.
Yeah, and I note that, the syllabus that this professor initially put out, Nate, as you reported in your story, that initially he had a line in there that told the students, look, I have been asked to remove certain words from this. I am not removing them because it is important to teach these words and the concepts that they convey. But he also had a line in there from Martin Luther King Jr. saying one has a moral responsibility to disobey unjust laws.
Right. Yeah, and look, I think he's I think it's clear, John White is sort of trying to make a statement with this, right? And trying to is putting himself, out in public on this and is, trying to change it. So, we'll see.
Yeah.
And he went along reluctantly at the point of a gun.
Words.
Because he said, I can't fight if I'm not employed here.
Yeah.
But then, filed a grievance and, so yeah, I mean, he's, sort of doing what he can, I think, within the bounds of like reasonable conduct, right? Again, yeah, you can't fight it if you're not employed by the university anymore.
Tricia, that climate of fear, I mean, one thing that came up at this was sort of a related matter, not specific to censorship, but just to that climate. There had been this exercise that sometimes corporations send out, fake phishing emails to try to see if anybody needs additional training, if they're clicking on things they shouldn't click on. And this one was, to the eyes of the people who received it, essentially, you've been targeted for a disciplinary action, click here. And of course, lots of people clicked because everybody has this, kind of lingering concern about whether, there is going to be some disciplinary impacts.
Sure. And I mean, John White, I really credit him for what he's doing, but think about some of the younger professors who don't have tenure anymore. There is no tenure essentially in Florida anymore, and they're trying to establish their careers, and they don't really have the bandwidth to fight back. They have families to support. They want to stay employed by a university, and the university is telling them, look, if you don't remove these words or if you don't promise to do this thing. One of the other things that we're all required to do at the beginning of the year is sign an attestation that says we have previewed every single text that we're going to use in our course and that there is nothing essentially woke in it. I mean, that's a scary thing to sign, especially if you know that you're teaching a course where there are going to be controversial things that come up. It's not something that you think, oh, well, they're going to come after me. But if they wanted to come after me, well, here's the first place
They'll
that they're going to go.
reason.
Yeah.
All right, I'm going to call from Ed in Orange Park. Good morning, Ed. Go ahead.
Good morning, great panel. Yes, we talk about diversity a lot, diversity of ideas. How many university faculties, even in the local ones, universities, identify as openly as Republican or conservative, especially in the fields that matter for the topic that we're discussing, which is the fields of journalism, social studies, humanities, political science, and law? Because I doubt that you're going to find many who are openly Republican conservatives in those colleges versus Democrats and liberal or even socialists or Marxists. According to every study that has been done by universities, including Harvard did a great one a couple of years ago. They did it on themselves, the Harvard Crimson, the paper, and they couldn't find anybody identifying in the faculty as a extremely conservative.
Sure. Yeah, thanks, Ed. I mean, I think that that's a common criticism that we hear of higher education, that it is, this is a reaction to, traditionally kind of leftist views that overtake campus or at least dominate the academic world, so that this is a correction as opposed to a reactionary posture.
Well, in some of the agreements that we've seen between universities and the Trump administration, there's been a tacit admission that that's the case. They don't come out and say it, but they go, yeah, kind of, all right, we'll make some changes. But again, it goes to trust and fear. Objective thought, there's nothing wrong with that. You give young minds each side of the coin. They get to choose which side they want, or sometimes they'll want heads this time, tails the next. It's just the fear of not thinking exactly the way that the powers that be want you to think that pervades this whole debate.
I think the whole idea of alternative facts has had definitely a problematic effect on liberal arts education as well, because you have a lot of professors who are teaching facts and not taking one side or another, but those facts are perceived as leftist. And I think that has become a real sticking point.
Well, when facts are problematic, I mean, the fact of slavery is a problematic topic. The fact of Jim Crow laws are a problematic topic. Those are things that are unpleasant or ugly parts of history. And so when you are factually teaching about things that existed and really happened, it can make people uncomfortable. And that really is the root of what a lot of these restrictions are designed to prevent people
100%.
from feeling uncomfortable.
Well, sometimes the truth is uncomfortable, and I totally agree with you. I just, as we were discussing this, I literally thought of something of the Nazis borrowed from American Jim Crow laws. That's not an opinion. That's a fact. That's stated in their propaganda, not what we as Americans have said. And so facts are sometimes supremely uncomfortable, but if you don't deal with them, there's even more discomfort.
Nate.
Yeah, I also, just on this point about the ideological mix of professors and colleges, I've always kind of struggled with this argument. If the argument is that professors and universities are or have been for decades like brainwashing kids, they've done a poor job. DeSantis is an Ivy League educated man. Ted Cruz is an Ivy League educated man. A lot of sort of right-wing elected officials are college educated and often did go to Ivy League schools. We have a public education system in this country that has been around for many, many, many decades and has created a country in which we are quite, polarized and really a 50-50 nation. So like, where was this brainwashing happening? Like, I just never quite understand the point of pointing that out. It's obviously not had much of an effect.
We've got a call from Linda in Mandarin. Good morning, Linda. Go ahead.
Yes, I was wondering, as I was listening to Ed talk about the profile of professors, and I thought part of it is people can apply, people can be hired. We're not supposed to ask their political affiliation to be able to get a job. And, and we do live in North Florida, Ed. The likelihood you're going to find too many liberals here is not high. It's probably 40%, but that's okay. And I just want people to understand, let's be honest. Now we're being asked to strike words, okay? If you don't know your history, you're going to repeat it. Go back to the 30s and early 40s. The next thing they're going to be asked to do is to pledge certain words that might be offensive to them because it might be calling me a name or generalizing a category of people, and then it might be asking you to take actions against those people. People need to understand, what are your red lines to have a job? Because that day is coming in this environment, and people need to figure out where they stand before they're asked to do that. You might have to give up a job if somebody tells you to categorize a person and that person should be purged from your classroom and should not be entitled to an education. That's where we're going. But let's be honest about it. Let's not, these power-hungry oligarchs and power-hungry politicians, they're not public servants. They're here to gain power and cement their power for the future. They could care less about our rights, and that's been obvious in this time frame. Thanks.
Oh, sorry, Linda. Thank you. Appreciate it.
I think that Linda brings up a good point regarding the absurdity of banning words. As a writer and a reader, I mean, is the word rainbow going to be banned next? It just seems absurd to be banning words, like you said earlier, have a variety of different contexts in which they can be used. It just seems just so ignorant.
It reminds me of when I was a child, and there were certain words that my mom said, "Oh, you're not allowed to use," and I would just find different euphemisms that she didn't understand, and they wouldn't be expletives, and she would just say, "Well, what are you talking about?"
Yeah.
I just shrugged my shoulders, and so that might be what what might have to happen, and the government has, I shouldn't say this on air, but the government has a lot more power than my mom does, to make sure that certain words are used.
We've got a couple of messages we've gotten, and then I want to move on. Wells on Facebook saying this is no different than the Daughters of the Confederacy that controlled the history of the South, and anything that was said that didn't go along with the mythology of the lost cause was not allowed to be put into textbooks. Bart emailing, I teach at UNF, and I wanted to say that one reason we don't have more conservative faculty members is because, quote, conservatism has become so deeply hostile to the traditions of free inquiry, open debate, and evidence-based argumentation on which higher education is built. If you're just joining us, I'm talking to Nate Monroe, Tricia Booker, Will Brown, and Frank Powers about the week's headlines, and you can join our conversation at 904-549-2937. You can also email us at firstcoastconnect@wjct.org. You can also watch our live stream now on Facebook and the WJCT Public Media YouTube channel. I want to move on now, Will, to a story that you have been covering now for some months. This week, a special city council committee and Eastside residents came to sort of an uneasy truce about a means of distributing what will ultimately be more than $100 million of investment in the historic Eastside. And we can get to the two funding models in just a minute. But first of all, I want you to explain who are the two competing sides in this debate, and why is there a divide? What interests does each side represent?
So there is the Historic Eastside Coalition Incorporated. This was founded earlier this year by a number of Eastside legacy residents, some business owners. They are incorporated, but really were a handful of people who didn't fully trust that the process would help all of the neighborhoods of the East Side, because the East Side extends all the way up into Long Branch and then all the way down to where the stadium is. The other coalition is something called the Together East Side Coalition. that is not incorporated.
Same name.
Same name. But the one that was incorporated, they say, well, we started the incorporation so that the name was not taken. That is what they claim. The not incorporated group has nonprofits, has longtime pastors, has longtime residents, has people who've been recognized by the Jaguars for their community work. And they
came first.
Yes, they came first. They've been meeting for, I want to say, 3 or 4 years.
So this is the group that people who have been following city council and this whole Stadium of the Future debate will recognize as the people who showed up in the orange shirts.
Correct.
So they're not incorporated.
Correct.
But they're the original group.
Yes.
Okay.
And so they are people who have more, I won't say have more ties, but have
this is
more
Lift,
resources.
Lift Jax.
Lift Jax is
They've
one
been
of the,
working it.
Yes. Lift Jax has its CEO Travis Williams is a 4th generation Eastside resident who Travis grew up out east. He went to schools out east. And so a lot of the when the Deb store opened in last year,
The grocery store.
yes, the grocery store, first full grocery store on the east side in a long time, a lot of the ad hoc members, the orange shirt group, were there to celebrate. Whereas the incorporated group, maybe 1 or 2 members, but they weren't there in an official capacity.
So we know that there's Together Eastside Coalition in the orange shirts. There's Together Eastside Coalition Incorporated.
Yes.
What is the beef, though? What is the difference?
The incorporated group does not believe that the coalition has the full interests of the East Side at heart, whereas the orange shirt unofficial group, they say they do. There's just at the end of the day, there's a lack of trust, and not just between the two groups, but there's a lack of trust between City Hall and because there have been promises made and promises broken. And so the incorporated group doesn't really believe City Hall or the unincorporated group to do what has been promised or said will happen.
Is this going to present a long-term challenge or a permanent rift when we're talking about the expenditure of all this money? Obviously, there's a lot headed over the next 20 years to that. Well, the next 10 years to that
$40
region.
million.
$40 million over the next 7 years of city money, and then the Jaguars money comes $2.5 million a year starting in 2028 for the next 30 years after that. So by 2060 or 2058, I'll be in my 70s by then.
It's not a bad thing, okay?
But ultimately about $115 million.
Yes.
So is this going to be a problem?
In my opinion, I don't think so. I think that they'll be able to, there might be some hard conversations had outside of eyesight of mine and reporters, but I think that there will be able to be consensus, because at the end of the day, the two groups really love the East Side. They just have different ways of how they think it should be developed, of how the money should be, who controls how the money is developed, allocated.
Nate, I mean, historically, when there have been any neighborhood, any area, or any interest that has been, the subject of a chunk of city money, there often are, differing narratives, differing priorities. What is your sense of how this is going to play into what is an effort to really, as we said, right some historic wrongs about, an area that has not gotten proper investment or has not really gotten equal investment?
Yeah, I mean, that's a good question. I as you said there, it would be news if this debate were not happening. I mean, I do not find these concerns shocking, and I actually think it's healthy. Like, I think that these two groups probably should go at it a bit over this money and over these priorities. The Jaguars and City Hall, the idea that there is going to be this kind of top-down edict on how to spend this money, like, I do think that is something that residents should be rightly concerned doesn't happen. And so, like, I think that these debates are good, and I think that having to navigate those waters will probably bring better results. Now, this is also not uncommon in these community benefits agreements that, money sometimes gets squandered or the governance structure just kind of ends up not working super well. I mean, this is also just kind of part of the deal. People are always going to squabble over millions of dollars. So, we're just going to have to see. This is a long-term agreement, and there is a lot that's going to happen in the world and in Jacksonville in this time, and whether or not this works is dependent on some of that too.
We've got a call from Manus in downtown Jacksonville. Good morning. Go ahead.
Good morning. Good morning. I'm in the room when this discussion is taking place here. You're not telling Will and the other gentleman are not telling the truth. They're giving a perspective, and they are not in the room. They are doing the injustice supposed to be on 8th Philip Randolph, not all over the east side. The Caucasian community, Lift Jackson, are trying to steal money because they are taking money off the top, where they've been doing for systemically in the African American community, especially in the urban core. So y'all need to get it right. I'm talking to Will and Monroe.
And Monroe, right. Nate Monroe, thank you for the call. I mean, Will, on that point, Lift Jacksonville, which is associated with the orange shirts and sort of the original group and is run by Travis
Williams.
They have been receiving a fair amount of money from various nonprofits and have been, they've got a fairly good sized budget. And that was something that came up. Is that money playing out on the East Side in a way that is truly benefiting the full East Side? Are they spending on appropriate priorities?
Yes, but it is not being seen fast enough for the satisfaction of all folks out east, and that is where the frustration stems. Lift Jax has partnered, I want to say, with the Community Foundation to improve homes along Van Buren Street. They were a part of getting the Deb's store created, reopened. But the frustration is people would like to see more faster. Mm-hmm. That is why folks that I've spoken with have said that they don't fully trust Lift Jax. Now, to address what Mr. Scott says, who is our most recent caller, Stanley Scott, the money was never intended solely for A. Philip Randolph Boulevard. It was intended for the entirety of the East Side. And one of the disagreements, which is why the Together East Side Coalition Incorporated was founded, was because there was a concern that the portion of the East Side, the Long Branch and Phoenix neighborhoods, which for those who aren't super familiar is north of the 20th Street Expressway, but north of the 20th Street Expressway and east of Main Street, essentially, that those parts of the East Side were being forgotten in the conversations about the community benefits agreement.
And it's fair to say that, the East Side is not a monolith, right?
Oh,
there
absolutely
are
not,
parts
no.
of it that are, especially on A. Philip Randolph, you've got a lot of, really successful businesses. You sort of have this historic footprint that has had traditionally more investment and more money going through it. And there are other parts of the East Side that are suffering, a great deal more.
And honestly, next weekend will be a great example of essentially the two East Sides, because the A. Philip Randolph corridor, there are going to be a whole lot of people over there after Georgia finishes doing what they do to the Gators during the Florida-Georgia football game. But and there's people over there, there's activity, and there's people on the Sunday and Monday afterward who are actively cleaning up. There's a community cleanup that takes place on A. Philip Randolph in the immediate aftermath. But the northern part of the East Side, there isn't foot traffic and vehicular traffic in the aftermath of the Florida-Georgia football game.
I do want to move on now to a topic about the airport authority. This is a issue that has been kind of on a low simmer for a while now, Nate, but a very, I think, stark disagreement between Nick Howland, Jacksonville City Councilmember Nick Howland, and the Aviation Authority in terms of what he thinks their priorities should be, what they think their priorities should be, and, a lot of money at stake.
Yeah, and just I'll take a step back just for a second and say that the Jacksonville Aviation Authority is what's called an independent authority in the city of Jacksonville. There are several of these authorities. JEA is one of them. The Transportation Authority is one. Um, and the like nature of these independent authorities and how independent they are from City Hall is something that comes up with all of them from time to time. This is neither the first nor the last time that an authority and a city official are going to butt heads over finances and sort of power. And so I think like right now it's apparently the aviation authority's turn in the barrel. They all sort of go through this. The aviation authority, I think that there is a general consensus in the city that the CEO, Mark Van Loo, has been a very good steward of Jacksonville International Airport. That is the most public-facing responsibility the aviation authority has. And in the course of managing its that and its three other airports, has accumulated hundreds of millions of dollars in cash on hand. The Aviation Authority claims this is not unusual, that other such airport authorities and major metros kind of have cash on hand, and this is something that they need to be able to operate and respond in crises, et cetera, et cetera. But at least in the city of Jacksonville, $1 million will never go missed, right? Maybe even to connect to our Eastside discussion we just had. This is a city that I think is going to have some cash flow issues in the next several years. And so Nick Howland, really for the past, it's been about 2 years, has been going through one idea after the next to kind of enlist the aviation authority to use its financial resources to help the city on a variety of different priorities, some that are quite far afield from anything the aviation authority does.
It's sort of interesting because in your reporting, he's calling this for a conservative, fiscally conservative Republican, he's calling this excess profits that they've made. And so there's some $300 million that he's eyeing, and he's proposed a range of uses for it that are really divorced from the operations of an airport, including, should they host the jail? Should they pay for the jail? Should they raise the power lines over the St. Johns River to accommodate cargo ships? A very broad array of city costs that he's looking to perhaps, or was looking, I guess, before he got shot down.
Right. And the kind of, I think the most recent manifestation of this is that he wants to see the aviation authority do more to develop Cecil. Cecil Airfield is one of the aviation authorities for airports. It has the ability to launch. It has one of the longest runways on the East Coast, and has the ability to do horizontal launches, to launch small payloads into kind of low Earth orbit. He's actually not alone in wanting to see the aviation authority do more with Cecil. I think the authority has its own sort of argument that they're already doing quite a lot and they have had some success out there. But yeah, the asks of them have kind of run the gamut the last several years. This is not just about Cecil. This has been a long running thing that Nick Howland has brought up with them. And, that money is governed by what are apparently pretty strict rules from the federal government about how this kind of money can be used. And it really has to be pretty closely tied to its core responsibilities to manage, aviation authority assets.
Tricia, one of the things that was proposed initially as well is making certain airport fees, kind of waiving certain airport fees, including parking for city officials, which is kind of an interesting addendum. But, a lot of people go in and out of the airport. There's not a lot of understanding that all of this is playing out behind the scenes. They just want to make sure that their flight is there on time and that they can get like their Cinnabon and get on board.
Right. Well, what's really baffling to me is that a lot of the things that he has proposed, that Holland has proposed, have gone to JEA. JAA has gone to FAA, and the FAA has said, yeah, that's against the law. That's illegal. And Nick Holland's response is, well, maybe let's keep talking about it. That's kind of baffling to me, and it is reminiscent of what's going on at the federal level as well, that we're trying to use money that is not really legal for us to use.
All right, we've got a call from Charles on the West Side. Good morning, Charles. Go ahead.
Good morning, everybody. You know, the through line that I keep seeing in the articles about Nick Howland in the past here, he's always talking about jobs, 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 and we're going to bring in this, you know. And he's not even a West Side councilman, is he? But I think he's trying to position himself for either a run for mayor or whatever. I think he's trying to set it up so he can say, oh, I brought all these jobs over to the West Side, blah, blah, you know, that kind of thing. So it seems.
Thanks, Charles. I mean, I think, you know, let's give him credit where credit is due. I mean, everybody wants jobs, Frank. And if he brings a lot of jobs by redirecting airport priorities, surely he would deserve some credit for that.
Well, Mark Van Lowe has made a point of saying, hey, we're doing that already. Point out to Boeing. 550 jobs they expanded the plant. He pointed out to Auto Aviation. It's committed to coming here in 2031 to build commercial jets. Another 400 jobs. He calls those home runs. He said, you get one of these, you know, every now and then. We got two here. So Van Lowe is pushing back at the insistence by Howland that they're not effectively managing their money with regards to developing Cecil Commerce Center. Everybody is making nice now. There's going to be a committee made up of city council members and JA members to go forward with that vision. But the real enlightenment comes from the texts and the emails. What they're saying when they don't think anybody's going to see them. And Howland is asking his buddy, Brian Hughes at NASA, who is Mr. Van Lowe's allies? Okay.
Brian Hughes is the former chief administrative officer for Lenny Curry and now works at NASA under the Trump
administration. So why is he
administration.
asking that question? Why are you asking who's allies? Does that mean there's a context of who are the enemies? And there's no doubt, as the caller just said, you know, you're going to see Howland running for mayor, and he's looking for things to bolster his campaign.
We should say that good reporting you did, Nate, was a partnership with David Bauerlein at your former stomping grounds at the Florida Times Union, but really good stuff, worth checking out. I do want to move on to the topic of some really, a couple of high-profile cases involving 3 defendants that were pretty big losses for the state attorney's office, Frank. This was one case a lot of people will remember perhaps more than the other was the murder of Prince Holland, who was a 13-year-old who was caught in apparently some sort of gang gunfire exchange when he was leaving.
Well, it wasn't an exchange. It was a drive-by.
Yeah, but it was a attack apparently related to gang activity. And he was in a car with his coach leaving football tryouts.
Right, and 2 other kids. And 2 men drove up alongside the car, and one of them unloaded with an assault rifle. Prince Holland was killed. The coach was shot 10 times, managed to survive. One of the other kids was wounded. The case ground on and was the state attorney's office wanted to try it once, one jury. But the defense argued successfully there should be 2 juries.
There were 2 defendants, we should say.
2 defendants. Marcel Johnson was the driver. Contravious Gerard was the alleged shooter. The jury for Marcel Johnson deadlocked. There were, from what I hear, there was maybe 1 or 2 that could not go along with the majority on a conviction, so there'll be a second trial for him. Mr. Gerard took the stand and said, I wasn't there. I never did it. Physical evidence was lacking in this case. The only thing that they tied him to the car was 1 fingerprint on the car. Here's the key thing. Marcel Johnson, who was arrested first, he told police that Gerard was the shooter, but he kept backtracking. And in the end, he even signed an affidavit saying, no, Gerard wasn't the shooter. But they couldn't put him on the stand. So without him going on the stand, Gerard's jury could not see the tape deposition in which Johnson first said that Gerard was the shooter. So he got on the stand, confidently said, I didn't have anything to do with this, and he was acquitted. So he's done. There'll be a retrial for Johnson.
Is it the fact that they had 2 juries, the reason that they couldn't introduce testimony from Johnson,
Yes.
pinpointing Contravious Gerard's participation?
If they had put Johnson on the stand, then they could have. But the defense chose not to put Johnson on the stand, so then you can't have the taped deposition introduced against Gerard because that he is not able to confront his accuser, who in this case is his co-defendant. It's a very bizarre situation.
This was one of 2 cases, as we mentioned, and the other one involved a shooting that happened at the Morton's Steakhouse or the Hyatt Regency, kind of depending. It was like a bathroom.
That was a lot of young drunk men getting together. These two guys did not know each other, Corey Hall and Cavante Schliefer. They were at a party. There was a fatal.
We are not actually going to have time for the details on that, but just briefly, the upshot on these two losses back to back, what does it mean?
If I'm the state attorney's office, I do not want two juries in the Brodigan case.
Interesting. All right. Well, we did reach out to Melissa Nelson, the state attorney, and she said these are both difficult cases, each with challenges, and that they are going to take up the case against Johnson. So they're going to resume that. Thank you all for being here. Really appreciate it. We'll be back in just a minute.
Thank you.
Terrell Hogan Law.
I'm Wayne Hogan. Car accidents happen too often for your family to go unprotected. Uninsured motorist insurance. When you need it, will you have it?
More at TerrellHoganLaw.com. The Florida Forum Speaker Series, benefiting Wolfson Children's Hospital, welcomes professional basketball player Caitlin Clark, October 29th at the Jacksonville Center for the Performing Arts. Tickets and information at thefloridaforum.com.
This is Tom Hudson. You think like an individual, not an algorithm.
Hi, thanks for taking my call.
You want civility, not cynicism.
Yes, I just wanted to make up a couple of thoughts.
You like to be engaged, not enraged. Alan has been listening in to our conversation in Miami. Go ahead, Alan, you're on the radio.
Oh, yes.
Then join me every Friday for the Florida Roundup. It's the place to hear from your neighbors and newsmakers from across the state. The Florida Roundup, Fridays noon until 1.
On the next Fresh Air, 3 interviews with Susan Stamberg. She died last week at age 87. When she became the co-host of All Things Considered in 1972, it made her the first woman to anchor a nightly national news program. She was a founding mother of NPR, an inspiration to many female broadcasters, and beloved by listeners. Join us.
Today at 1 on WJCT News 89.9.
Most federal workers won't get paid on Friday, and lawmakers are no closer to a deal. On the next Friday News Roundup, the toll of more than 3 weeks of a shuttered government grows. Plus, President Trump tears down the East Wing of the White House, redistricting moves ahead in North Carolina, and good news on children's allergies. The News Roundup, next time on 1A.
Today starting at 10 on WJCT News 89.9.
Welcome back. Celebrating Filipino American Pride is the focus of an event this weekend, a Barrio Fiesta that is happening in Jacksonville. Here to tell us about it is Christina Comstock, the co-founder and chairman of the Filipino American Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce. Good morning, Christina.
Hello, good morning.
We are also joined by Nita Escobar, the group's treasurer. Good morning, Nita.
Good morning.
So tell us a little bit, Christina. First of all, what made you want to establish this chamber organization in the first place?
Yeah, we have the Filipino American Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce, and the purpose of that is actually to unite and promote Filipino entrepreneurship here in Jacksonville. During our gala, sometime in 2022, I believe, we had our guest, which actually made us very motivated to bring this Filipino American Jacksonville Chamber of Commerce to its height, because what it does is she said that we would like you to promote small businesses here in Jacksonville, because it's one of the sort of breadwinners for our community, and one of the best employee generation in our country too.
And Nita, I don't know if a lot of people are aware of how significant the Filipino American population of this region is compared to the rest of the state.
Oh yeah, here in Jacksonville, we have the most number of Filipinos in all of Florida.
And is that largely, is that a recent development? Is that something that followed like the Second World War? When did that population become so significant in this part of the state? Or Christina?
Yeah, I think you're right, because this city is actually, we call it the Navy City.
Yeah.
So we have a lot of Filipinos actually coming from the Philippines who actually helped Americans to join the war and so on. And then from there it grew. So they actually liked people from California, other cities nationwide said that, hey, this is more like a tropical state. We would like to be there.
Right. And so the population now is like a fifth of the overall state population of the Filipino American population is here in Duval County.
Very much, yes.
And so when it comes to a chamber of commerce representing that community, is that a large segment of the employers in the city? Is it a large kind of incubator for businesses?
Absolutely. We just brought in one of the restaurants in the Philippines, a franchise worldwide, and immediately they hired like more than 50 people.
Wow. So this event that's this weekend is a celebration, really, of culture, of the community. Certainly, food is a big part of that, Nita. So
Yes,
tell us a little bit about what is on deck this weekend.
okay, and this weekend we're gonna have a Filipino American Barrio Fiesta, and we're gonna have a lot of food trucks and food vendors. We also have entertainments, like singers, bands, and Zumba dancing, and also we're gonna have some sports presentation, and just bring your family. It's a free public event.
Yeah, and so it is not just for the Filipino American community. It really is for the community at large. And so, how important is inviting in sort of the larger community and asking them to get acquainted with the culture in terms of just promoting it overall?
Yeah, it's very important. We have a very interesting culture, as you know. People like to go to the Philippines. They say that, we're everywhere. You go to a cruise, we're there. You go to a hospital, we're there. You see a doctor, a dentist, everywhere you see us, even nannies, actually. And we are proud of that too. But interestingly, the Filipinos born in the US, we call them American Filipinos. And we coming here are Filipino Americans. And this is also for them because what they do is whenever we talk about the Philippines, they kind of, really, are you a third world country or are you a modernized country? And they go to the Philippines and they're awed because it's really a very modernized country nowadays.
And a beautiful place and a beautiful people. So, what is a barrio fiesta? What's the definition of a barrio fiesta?
A barrio fiesta is barrio means a village, okay, and then a fiesta means feast. So it's a celebration, a huge celebration of Filipino community culture.
Yeah, and so obviously we mentioned the food, but there's going to be traditional performances, dance, and then
Yeah.
also just kind of mainstream entertainment like karaoke and line dancing and all of that as well.
Right.
Yeah. So this event is Saturday, as we mentioned. It's October 25th, which is tomorrow, 11 to 9 at Purple Roots, which is on Southside Boulevard. We've got a link on our website, but it is free and open to the public. And we thank you so much for being here. Christina Comstock, Nita Escobar, thank you. Really appreciate it.
Thank you so much for having
right.
us.
And thank you for listening. If you have feedback or suggestions, you can send them to First Coast Connect at WJCT.org. And if you missed anything, you can catch our rebroadcast at 8 o'clock tonight. You can also find our entire archive on the FCC YouTube channel and at WJCT.org or your favorite podcast platform. Join us Monday when we talk to Weekend Edition Sunday host Aisha Roscoe about the business of news and finding her voice. I'm Ann Schindler. You've been listening to First Coast Connect on WJCT News 89.9.
Support for First Coast Connect is provided by Baptist Health and the North Florida TPO.
The North Florida TPO is committed to shaping our transportation future. We're focused on planning, funding, clean fuels, and new technologies for a vibrant, connected community. Learn more at northfloridatpo.com. Baptist Health is a proud supporter of First Coast Connect. Baptist Health, committed to building a healthier community for all of us. More info at 202-4YOU or baptistjax.com. Arbus Magazine's annual Art and Cultural issue is out, featuring an expanded art and cultural calendar, French Moderns exhibit at the Harn Museum of Art, and Cutting Culture, how universities are dismantling their legacies. Details at arbus.com.